You're ready to pop off, aren't you? Little one's on its way. Here it comes. Push. It's about to get insaner. Trust me, I'm the coctor.
Hello Whovians and welcome to my latest Doctor Who review, where today I continue my reviews of Doctor Who Series 6 with the second and final two-part story of the series, The Rebel Flesh and the Almost People. The story was written by Matthew Graham and it stars Matt Smith as the 11th Doctor. So, The Rebel Flesh and the Almost People, the basic plot is as follows. The Doctor, Amy and Rory visit an acid mining factory. A solar storm hits the factory, turning the workers' gangers into self-aware individuals. The Doctor must mediate between the original workers and their rebellious gangers. So, The Rebel Flesh and the Almost People. Everybody hates this story. This story gets a lot of flack. I can kind of see why, to be honest. I'm very torn with this one. I don't know, it's a weird one. Because on the one hand, I think the concept of the gangers is kind of cool. I mean, they're essentially clones of the of the workers. But to be honest, there isn't much of a story here. And I feel like this is a story that should have probably been one part, because it feels dragged out at two parts. And that's the biggest problem, I think, with this story, is that it just feels too long. It just feels so long and dull and boring. There's a lot of scenes in this story that I feel are kind of unnecessary, and I just ultimately lost interest. Like halfway through the first part, I didn't care after a while. I mean, the supporting cast are decent enough. I mean, obviously you have Jennifer, played by Sarah Smart, who's one of the main players, and for some reason Rory latches onto Jennifer quite a lot. They have a bit of a, not relationship, not a romantic relationship, but they form a friendship, and that's kind of Rory's role in the story. He kind of feels sidelined to the rest of the group because he's kind of busy trying to protect Jennifer. He feels very protective of her, and he is in the end tricked by her gangers. And yeah, it's kind of a weird place for Rory to be in the story. We see the character of Jennifer really turn kind of dark. We're meant to sympathise with her when she's looking at the picture of herself when she's younger, and she's saying, I'm the same person, I have the same thoughts and the same memories. And it's very hard to be sympathetic about her, because then she sort of turns quite dark. I know we're meant to sort of see this transition of a character where she's almost fallen from grace and she's kind of lost all sight of her purpose. But to be honest, it just doesn't work, and it just feels out of the blue the way her character just changes like that. And I just don't buy the whole Jennifer and Rory friendship. I just don't understand how Rory so quickly latches onto her. Literally, when they meet, it's like, oh, you're right. He goes over and he comforts her. It's just really weird. I mean, I don't know if they did it to create tension between Amy and Rory, but Amy never really questions the whole thing. I mean, Arthur Darvill gives a great performance as Rory, don't get me wrong, his performance is fine, but the dynamic is weird. I think Matt Smith does really well as the Doctor, especially as he gets to play essentially two versions of himself. Quite good for this story, the way that we have two Doctors on screen at one time, and one of the Doctors is a flesh and the other isn't. And I liked seeing Amy try to wrestle with that dynamic, and the Doctor really tests Amy in that instance in whether she can work out who the real one is. And he also did it to understand more about the flesh, which I think is interesting. And it is a nice nod back to the original Doctors, where we have Matt Smith at the beginning of the Almost People, where his ganger is kind of going out of control, and he's trying to, come to terms with all the previous regenerations, and he's saying quotes like, oh, one day I'll come back, and reverse the polarity of the neutron flow, and would you like a jelly baby? So yeah, it's an interesting little reference there. I quite like that. I think a lot of Whovians would dig that reference. Of course, Karen Gillan does a great job as Amy, although the ending twist of the story is really weird. The fact that we find out that Amy, throughout the entire of the series so far, has been a flesh copy. I don't know how that has happened, because we never saw Amy touch the flesh, or we never saw her do that, or we never saw somebody make a copy of her. So that didn't make sense, and it was interesting to see then she was in this white room in a sort of gown, and she was about to give birth to her daughter, which is interesting, with Madame Kavarian peeping over her saying, "Here it comes." Yeah, this woman with the eye patch who's appeared in every episode since the start of Series 6, we see Madame Kavarian. We get to know her a bit more in the next story, A Good Man Goes to War, but yeah, a very weird place to end the story. Like, after the Doctor and Amy and Rory say goodbye to the others, they they have to deal with that, and it's interesting. And the Doctor knew this from the beginning of the story, and he was going to send them away to get fish and chips, but yeah, he didn't tell them about this, and he wanted to learn more about the flesh. As for the rest of the supporting cast, I think they're pretty good. I mean, you've got Mark Bonner as Jimmy. I believe he's the one who has a son called Adam, who he reunites with at the end, although it's actually quite tragic. The original guy, the original father, dies and lets the Ganger version of himself take the place of him to raise his son. I thought that was quite nice. It's the same with Jennifer's scene where she's looking at the picture. Some of the emotional scenes in the story do work quite well, and I think if playing the story from an emotional angle is interesting. The fact that these clones have taken on a life of their own, and they are coming to terms with human thoughts and feelings and emotions, and I think that should have been the focus of the story, the emotion. But the story just kind of seems all over the place. One minute it's doing the whole emotional angle, then it's a repeat of the Hungry Earth and Cold Blood, with this whole idea of starting a revolution against humanity. And it just feels like, I mean, this thing with Jennifer where she's like, we need to go to war. It's like, over what? Where has this come from? It's come out of nowhere. I feel like this story is all over the place. There's like 2 or 3 different plots going on, and it doesn't really make sense. And what's the whole thing with the solar flare, and how does that cause them to assume life of their own? I just don't understand. So once again, we have another story which is a little bit confusing in a lot of areas. There are some entertaining scenes, and some of the sequences are actually quite scary. I think the scare factor for this story is quite good. The way, especially when we see the Doctor's Ganger screaming at the beginning of the second part, and the bloodshot eyes, and the yellow eyes. It's really, really freaky, and the sort of CGI white pale faces of the Gangers look really cool, and they do look quite effective actually. I love the look of them. I've always loved the way the Gangers look. It's kind of muddled, and it's a little bit unfocused. I think that's the problem. And again, the pacing of the story really drags quite a lot. This could have been one part. It could have been one part, but well, it was 2. And again, an emotional scene where the Ganger version of Jimmy takes the place of the real version and speaks to his son on the hologram, which is a nice moment. That's a very tender moment there. Also, we have Cleves, played by Raquel Cassidy. She's good. She's sort of a bit. We don't really quite know the true measure of her until the end, and we find out that the company they work for have been basically, lying to them about what actually happens to the discarded flesh. As far as revelations go, it's not the most, riveting one. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's what they're doing. And then at the end, the Doctor brings them to I think somewhere in London. I'm assuming this building in London is like, go and tell them about what they've been doing and how wrong it is. Make sure they know. I'm not entirely sure what the whole thing was. It's something to do with... Yeah, honestly, I'm kind of confused by it. I mean, I was kind of with the story with the first 20 minutes. I thought, okay, this is actually kind of cool. But once the sort of solar flare scene happens, and then we go into sort of the Gangers coming to life, the whole story sort of... it's very sad. It sort of falls apart. Music by Murray Gold is quite good. And again, I like the lighting of this story. The fact that it's all dark and atmospheric and moody. And it's really creepy. And I think that's the atmosphere and the vibe of the story is really good. It's the story itself. So, yeah. The Rebel Flesh and the Almost People, not great, as far as I'm concerned. Is it the worst of the series? No, it's not the worst, but I can't say it's particularly good either. It's very poor by all accounts. But there's some good little things in there and some good performances. But I didn't care for it. So overall, I'm probably going to give the Rebel Flesh and the Almost People. I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Yeah, I feel bad, but then this series is not really doing anything for me at the moment. It's, I hate to say it, the only story I've sort of moderately enjoyed is the first one, and we're almost halfway through the series. But thankfully, we get to a great story next time, where we come to A Good Man Goes to War, which would have been the end of Series 6, Part 1. This was where the series was split, and after the next episode, the series would the rest of the series wouldn't air until later in 2011, so autumn 2011. And this is of course the end of the two-part stories for Matt Smith's era. All the rest of his stories are all one part. We will see two-parters again, we will, but not till Peter Capaldi's era. So yeah, that's my review of The Rebel Flesh and the Almost People. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Please comment down below, let me know, and stay tuned next time when I review A Good Man Goes to War. So until then, I'm Mr. Thomas 11. Thank you for watching. See ya. Bye for now.